What's up, YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Faith. I'm an astrologer who specializes in astrocartography as well as money readings. Welcome. In today's video, we're actually going to continue our Black History Month theme that we have going, and we are going to be talking about the figure Malcolm X. If you're unfamiliar with Malcolm X, he was a civil rights movement leader who really preached the independence of the Black community, especially economically or socioeconomically. He also mentioned doing more of a self-defense kind of mechanism instead of the peaceful protests that you would normally see during the civil rights movement. He definitely stood for Black nationalism, and then later on in his life, after his pilgrimage to Mecca, he even talked about Black internationalism as well as just overall humanitarian rights. So overall, he played a key role in shaping the future and history of Black people in America. Now, rewinding back a little bit, if you're unfamiliar with what Black History Month is and you're unfamiliar with the term, what it is, why we have it, then I highly recommend that you check out my blog. I'll link it in the description down below, talking about the importance of Black History Month and why it still matters. So there's that. So today we're actually going to look over the astrocartography map of Malcolm X and a lot of the key cities that he interacted with or lived in. They had astrocartography lines, and it was interesting how these themes played out in a lot of his life as well as his career. So juicy stuff. I'm really excited because I was actually able to get his birth time, alleged birth time, because with public figures or celebrities, we never really truly know. We just kind of have to go with the common consensus. That's just like for the longest time, Beyonce's time was one thing until she put it in a book or an article or something. Until she said it herself, that's when you got the actual time. So alleged time. So the chart that I'll be using is May 19th at 10:25 p.m. in Omaha, Nebraska. So starting with his hometown in Omaha, Nebraska, he was actually born on a Chiron IC line as well as a Moon IC line, and his hometown is still within the radius of his Mars descendant line and his Pluto descendant line. I'm going to hold off on the Mars descendant and the Pluto descendant simply because they play a lot of major roles in events later on in his life as he moved closer to these lines when he moved to Michigan. So starting off with the Moon IC, this is already kind of hinting at like his childhood and his home life. It may have been very emotionally taxing, or overall there is some type of an emotional attachment to his early childhood. It could have just been really emotionally charged or something that's very emotionally activated with the moon being on the IC. Now, when we add Chiron into the mix, this is already telling me that he came into this life with work to do. And that's no shade, or that's not saying like he was jaded from the jump. It's just saying that with Chiron being on your IC, like your inner foundation, there will be wounds to heal. There will be things that play out where you will have to transmute them and turn them into medicine, or they will rot you from the inside out. Because IC lines, or the IC angle in general, is about, it's related to the home, but it's really our inner foundation when we think on an energetic perspective. So with the moon and Chiron being on that angle, his inner foundation is one that was built through a lot of alchemy and hard work and transmutation. A lot of wounds came up. Now, a major event that I know of didn't necessarily happen in Nebraska, but I think a lot of these themes played out throughout his life, as we'll see. So within his childhood, the family moves to Lansing, Michigan, putting him right near or closer to his Mars descendant and Pluto descendant line. Now, Mars descendant is confrontation. It's, Mars is the planet of war, as we've discussed on this channel. Mars line video coming soon. But Mars is the planet of war, aggression. These lines are great for any type of movement or fitness, wellness, anything like that. But if you don't use this energy productively, it can be pretty destructive. And the same can be said with Pluto descendant line. This is manipulation, this is destruction, this is death, this is really a lot of transformation. Now, with it being on the descendant, this is related to other people. And unfortunately, these lines played out a little bit more literal for Malcolm. So in 1928, the Little House family was actually burned down. I don't know if they actually found the actual culprits, but Malcolm believed that it was the doing of a white supremacist group. And then a couple of years later, in 1931, his father passed away in a car accident. Malcolm later on came out saying that it was the KKK who did it. And his mom actually had a bad feeling, like telling her husband, you shouldn't go out tonight, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, he did pass away. So that Pluto descendant line played out literally as far as death and, dealing with other people, his dad, but also dealing with a group of other people. And then as far as the Mars line, that confrontation, that aggression, these aggressive acts like the burning of the house, all of these things played out literally for Malcolm during this time. And because of these events, it left his mom and him, and I believe he has siblings, where they had to depend on government assistance because they didn't have, money coming in with the head of the household, the father, not there. Okay. Fast forward, let's move over to Boston. Now, in Boston, Massachusetts, around 1941, Malcolm moves with his sister. She gets custody of him. He's in the streets. He's hustling. He's hanging out with probably not the best crowd. He is stealing stuff, and it's a group of them. From my research, it was a group of them. And I think 2 of them were black, 2 of them were white, or he had a white girlfriend. In 1946, he went to prison for grand larceny because this same group, I think they tried to steal from like a jewelry store or something like that. But basically, the guys were charged, and his girlfriend, since she was a white woman, they dropped the charges against her. They tried to convince her to, say he raped her, or basically make it look like, go against Malcolm. And she refused, from my understanding. But he went to prison in 1946, and I believe he stayed in prison until 1952. All right, so when we break this down from an astrocartography perspective, this is still the activation of the Mars descendant line, because it's like you are getting involved with the wrong people. You out in the streets, you gang life, low key. It probably wasn't like modern day gang life, maybe, but it was more so like you're in the streets doing shady things, and as a consequence, you go to jail, which the law, arrest, jail, prison, all of those, the law is more so Jupiter themes, and he does have a Jupiter ascendant line here. So it's expanding all these things that you're doing, and then obviously you got to reap the consequences of those things. Prison would also be a representation of his Saturn MC line, because prison is literally confinement. You're confined, you are set to a routine that is not your own, or a discipline that is not your own, etc., etc. And Saturn rules structure, it rules discipline, it rules confinement, it rules time. Normally when you go to prison, it's on a certain time restriction, or how many years you have as far as your sentencing. So all of these things, these lines are kind of playing out literal, but you can see how the energy is manifesting in his life and throughout his life, because he kind of pretty much stayed in the same northeastern area of the United States. You see how these themes also shift as he matures and as he grows as a person. And I say that because while he was in prison, he actually began studying Islam, and he joined the debate team in prison. And that's when you start to see this birth of public speaking, which later on obviously comes in handy a lot during his life. So we begin to see already the transition from more of this Saturn MC line being constrictive or restrictive to it is now productive. Like it is creating the structure or foundation in which he would pretty much build upon for the rest of his life. Fast forward to 1952, Malcolm is released from prison and he immediately starts solidifying and building his identity and his legacy. So he moves to Detroit, where he joins the Nation of Islam, and he also drops his surname. So he's no longer Malcolm Little. This is when he officially became Malcolm X. And I think this is definitely Saturn MC line coded, but also with him dropping his surname and kind of breaking away from the wounds, the pains of the surname, what that was associated with. I feel like that is still the Chiron IC theme playing out there, and kind of him taking matters into his own hands and doing things his way. The reasoning for it, he said it was a slave name and he didn't want that. So he dropped it. And now to this day, Malcolm X is still known. So there we go. So in astrocartography, when we talk about Saturn MC lines, we're talking about structure. We're talking about you are finally being seen for your work or for your value, or you're finally getting the recognition you feel that you deserve. It's a lot of wisdom that comes with the Saturn MC line if you are willing to do the work, if you are willing to put in what it requires in order for you to see those results. Results may feel delayed here. It could feel that kind of energy of it's been a long time coming. And you may see this in his story, or you may see this in other people's story, or if you personally have experience with a Saturn MC line, these things may resonate with you. But going back to Malcolm, while he was in Detroit, he really made his mission to spread the word and increase the membership numbers of the Nation of Islam. He got Elijah Muhammad's approval and pretty much went on a mass campaign for this. And we'll see that more and more, that activation of his Jupiter ascendant line, because Jupiter rules religion, and the Nation of Islam played a key role in Malcolm's story. But overall, this energy in Detroit really activated his Saturn MC line, in my opinion, just because he built that public figure that we know him today. Like, this was the basis. Like I said before, he built that foundation in prison, and then now we see him build upon it. The next city, I would say most influential city of his story would be Harlem, New York. And this is because we see a lot of different themes play out from his astrocartography chart, or from his astrocartography map, for this city. So the first one, like I said, being Jupiter, the Jupiter ascendant line, here religion played a major role, major key. The Nation of Islam, like I said, was a big part of his life. And during his time here, it truly showed, because he put in a lot of work, a lot of leadership opportunities with this organization. In 1954, he was actually appointed the chief minister of Temple number 7, I believe. And I think this truly reflects the Jupiter ascendant line, because with the Jupiter ascendant line, Jupiter is on your rising sign or your ascendant. It's in your first house. It's all about you. So your belief systems, your philosophy, you're automatically magnetizing, not in a Venus way, but just more so people want to listen when you speak with Jupiter being in your first house. You are getting an expansion of opportunities and, being in the right place at the right time kind of energy. Now, this could also have you feeling very overconfident and just saying things and expecting people to just go with it, because you have Jupiter in your first house and you're like, oh, I got this, even if you aren't fully prepared. But for him, I think this really played out in a religious or organizational way or philosophy way, as far as like what he was preaching and, you know, his active role as the chief minister for the Nation of Islam. While being in Harlem, this is when his work actually reached like a national scale. So I think it was truly activated while he was there. In 1957, a temple member was actually beaten by police. He was being, you know, abused, wrongfully mistreated, basically, and Malcolm spoke up about it to the point where there were several Muslims in the street while he was confronting the police about it, and they would not disperse or they would not leave until Malcolm gave them the cue, which put the police and even the FBI on edge, and to the point where like the FBI starts watching him, like, hey, we got to watch this guy. He has some type of power. So they start having surveillance on Malcolm X. Now, starting from the top, I think his religious influence and political influence at this point is a reflection still of this Jupiter ascendant line. Like I just said, when you speak, people are wanting to listen, and that's exactly what was happening there. And again, Jupiter represents law. Because of this incident, Malcolm X actually sued the police, and I believe he won. But because of this incident, he took it into legal matters, not just direct confrontation. But the second thing I'll notice is going back to that Saturn MC line, the surveillance. And when I saw surveillance, I mainly thought about Pluto, actually. But the Harlem is actually out of the range for his Pluto descendant line. However, interestingly enough, his Saturn is in Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto. So we still have this Plutonian energy playing out with matters of the law and restriction and discipline when it comes to this Saturn MC line. And let's not forget, MC lines are high visibility, which you can see his influence as people in the street lining up ready to back him up. Saturn also correlates with like the government or institutions and creating pressure from these things, which is what we saw in this incident as he demanded that his temple member receive medical attention. Okay, fast forwarding to 1963. President John F. Kennedy is assassinated, and Malcolm is making controversial remarks about it. And the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, is like, no, sir, shut it down. So he is silenced. He's like, you're done making all these public remarks and appearances. And while this didn't, for me, I could have missed it with the astrocartography lines, but for me, I saw this as an activation of one of his aspect lines. Now, I always rank astrocartography lines as first, and then second would be aspect lines. And if you're unfamiliar with aspect lines, it's just like in a chart, you have aspects, but then you also have the lines on the map showing those aspects. So he has many aspect lines in this region, guys, but the one that stood out to me for this instance is actually his Neptune square IC. Let me break this down. The IC, as I said before, represents our inner foundations, our inner world. A square represents tension, okay? Neptune represents spiritual ideology, parts of religion, or just overall like our spiritual philosophy or our spiritual evolution. Malcolm's inner convictions start to be really in polar opposite, or slowly becoming polar opposite to what the Nation of Islam wants to represent, or just overall him saying whatever he want to say is not, they're not having that. They're like, you are a representation of us, and this is not the message that we are trying to portray. So it becomes a conflict of interest when he's doing things like this. So he is silenced. And for me, that really spoke to the Neptune square IC aspect line, simply because, again, you are evolving to one thing, but the religious or spiritual ideology that you have been tied to so deeply is now moving in a completely different direction than what you are believing and walking and living by. So while he had this Jupiter ascendant line that was very prevalent, we did get to see a little bit of this Neptune square IC aspect line, because it goes, it's this challenge between personal evolution and organizational loyalty or religious loyalty. The last event for Harlem was the actual assassination of Malcolm X. On February 21st, 1965, he was assassinated during one of his speeches. This event actually reflects his part of fortune ascendant line in Harlem. And I say that because in traditional astrology, the part of fortune is also or normally represented as health or even as the physical body. So with this happening right on his part of fortune line, this is no coincidence. In general, the part of fortune is, it's not necessarily that you're going to get fame, riches, etc., etc. It's literally like if I gave you a fortune cookie, like that is the lot, or that is the part of fortune that you were dealt. Malcolm's part of fortune was actually in Aquarius, so it was traditionally ruled by Saturn. The interesting thing about this is, again, Saturn was in Scorpio, so his Saturn is still a Plutonian Saturn. So there's still this theme of, or underlying theme of death. Now, if we look from a modern interpretation, his part of fortune being in Aquarius would be ruled by Uranus. His Uranus is in Pisces in the third house. Traditionally, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. The irony in all of this, or not so much irony, because again, this is the fortune that you were dealt. It later came out that his assassination, or the people responsible for his assassination, were from the Nation of Islam. So we're still seeing that silencing played out until the very end, but the same organization that he dedicated his life to took him out. Before we wrap up this video, I do want to rewind a little bit and take a look at his pilgrimage to Mecca and his travels throughout the Middle East. So he delivered the ballot or bullet speech, and then he went to travel throughout the Middle East and did a pilgrimage to Mecca, where his name changed again. He took on a Muslim name, and his views on Black nationalism was still there, but then he also started to see that he started to take a more global approach and take on a more humanitarian approach. But what was interesting is in Mecca, or not too far from Mecca, he has a Uranus MC line. And Uranus is all about change. It's about evolution. It's about doing things differently. It's about uniqueness. With that now being on his MC, that changes the way you do work. It changes your career, or it challenges the way that you've always done things. It literally challenges your legacy. And after his pilgrimage, that's kind of what we saw. He's challenging or questioning some of the ideals that he had before. Okay, the last thing that I want to highlight is the legacy of Malcolm X and how it still shows in his astrocartography map. In astrology, sometimes you'll hear people say that the chart lives on, especially with public figures. And in Malcolm's case, this is 100% true, in my opinion. And I say this because in 1966, the Black Panther Party was created. And Malcolm's assassination was actually a catalyst for the creation of this party. And this party also adopted a lot of his ideologies, especially around Black nationalism, the self-defense of Black people, as well as Black internationalism. Interestingly enough, Oakland, California is where Malcolm's Uranus IC line is, as well as his Venus descendant line. Now, we've already talked about Uranus. Again, it represents transformation, it represents change, humanitarianism, etc., etc. With it being on the IC, this is his radical and unique ideas still being the groundwork for future movements, which is very Uranus coded, because Uranus is all about advancement, the future, technology, etc., etc. On top of the fact that you have the Venus descendant line there, this represents sisterhood, brotherhood, community, this connection between different people forming a community and standing for something. So it was the basis for this community, or his work was the basis for this community, to then go out and further different civil rights movements. So this is beautiful how all of this has played out and came to light even after his passing. This was a year after his passing. I know that was a lot of information, and if you want to review it, don't forget that there is a corresponding blog that I have on my website that you can read through, breaking down these exact same interpretations. If you're still with me, thank you for being here, and I hope you've enjoyed this analysis of Malcolm X's astrocartography map. This isn't to replace history, and I didn't deep dive into history because I'm not a historian, y'all. I'm just really here for the astrocartography. I received a couple comments on the Tulsa race massacre. It's like, oh, did they say this or did they do this? Listen, I'm just looking it up and I'm giving you what I find. If you find something different, feel free to share that in the comments and we can just auto-correct each other at that point. But mainly I want to show how these energies are playing out on an astrocartography map or even the geodetic map. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think. What you think about this energy and how it all played out. And if you have any analysis that you see for yourself with some of these planets, I always enjoy you all's input as well. So thank you so much. And if this type of thing interests you, I encourage you to enroll in the Foundations of Astromapping course. This is my introductory course where I'm teaching you how to interpret the astrocartography map for yourself, as well as the relocated charts, parans, aspect lines, etc., etc. So if this is your vibe, then I'll link that in the description below. Enrollment will always be open. It's an evergreen course. Right now, we are actually having classes live though. So if you enroll at the time of this recording, February 2026, then you can join the second session and you have access for life as well as all the previous sections. So I hope to see you there, but I'll see you in the next video. Bye.